On July 23rd, 1995, in Midway, Arkansas, two best friends, Steve Hannat and Jace Kelley, both 17 years old, asked Steve's mom to drop them off at the lake that morning so they could go fishing. When Steve's mom came later that evening to pick up the boys, they were nowhere to be found. The next day, one of the boys was found walking along a deserted highway 1,379 miles away from the lake they'd been fishing at. What he told the authorities was truly bizarre and unbelievable. This is a story he told soon after he was picked up along the highway. I still don't believe where I'm at right now, but I also have a hard time believing what happened to me and Steve. Steve's mom dropped us off at the lake about 7 a.m. yesterday. We usually tried getting there earlier, but we were running late because I had a hard time waking up. Now, I wish I'd slept in. When we got out of the van and looked at the lake, we could see it looked like glass. We both looked at each other, and I said, "It's going to be a good day for fishing." Steve nodded his head and said, "Yeah, buddy." We fished this lake a lot, so we knew exactly which spot we wanted to start fishing, as we usually catch a lot of crappie there. I remember us waving to Steve's mom as she drove off. The plan was for her to pick us up sometime in the evening. We didn't really have a set time, and we'd brought along enough food and water for the day. We then went down to our usual hot spot and started fishing. We'd been fishing for a while and had only caught a few fish when Steve said, "Hey, let's try moving around the lake. Maybe the fish are in different spots today." I nodded my head as I grabbed my gear and started following Steve along the bank. We'd stop every 15 to 20 feet, cast our lines in, and if we didn't catch anything after several casts, then we'd move on. We did this for a bit and continued moving around the lake. The lake we fish is big, and one side of the lake has a lot of trees and thick bushes that lead to miles of forest. As we got closer to the trees, I could see what looked like an old, beat-up, green and white camping trailer, one you pull behind a truck. When Steve saw it, he looked at me and said, "That's weird. We come here all the time and have never seen that thing parked there." We continued walking closer to the trailer, and as we did, I noticed something odd. "Steve, look at that. There are no tire tracks from the trailer or a truck leading to it. How'd it get in here?" "Right. Plus there's no way it could get pulled in here with those trees being in the way," replied Steve as he pointed to the thick patch of trees surrounding the trailer. We both looked at each other with puzzled looks, and I could see from his face, like me, he knew something was off. So what he said next took me by surprise. "Let's go have a look at it and see if it's open," whispered Steve. "Nah, let's just go fishing. I don't want to mess with that thing," I replied. "Come on, man, don't be that way. We'll just have a quick look, and if it's not open, we'll go back to fishing," he said. "Fine, let's make it quick," I said. We then started slowly walking towards the trailer. I'd say we were about 20 yards away. The closer we crept towards it, the more I wanted to turn around and head back to the lake. The trees and bushes we were going through were thick, and we were getting eaten up by mosquitoes. When we got within a few yards of it, Steve looked back at me and said, "I'm going to check the door to see if it's open." I nodded my head and didn't move. As he slowly crept up to it and was about to grab the door handle, we heard some commotion coming from inside. It sounded like someone or something jumped down from somewhere inside and started running towards the door. That made Steve and me jump. We turned around and started running in the opposite direction. I remember hearing the front door opening and the sound of someone or something running swiftly behind me. Steve veered off to the left of me and yelled out something, but I couldn't make out what he'd said. I ran as fast as I could as branches from the trees and bushes hit my face, along with my eyes. My eyes were watering badly and it was hard to see, but I kept running. It seemed like there was no end to the bushes and trees. This meant I was heading away from the lake and deeper into the forest. After running for some time, I stopped behind a large tree to catch my breath. The second I stopped, something hit me hard in the back of the head. I hit the ground, then darkness. The next thing I remember was waking up in a dark place and the smell of dust hitting my nose. I tried moving my hands and feet, but they were tied up, and wherever I was too small for me to move around much. It was very hot and sweat was pouring down my face. I yelled out, but could tell by the sound my voice was not going to carry very far, so there was no point. As I laid there in darkness, all kinds of morbid thoughts entered my mind. I kept thinking, why was I in there, and who or what was it that hit me on the head, then tied me up? My mind then started wondering about Steve and where he was at. I tried fighting back the tears as I prayed he was all right. He'd been my best friend since before I can remember. Suddenly, and without warning, it seemed as if whatever I was in was moving, which I guessed was the trailer by the lake. There was a low humming noise that got louder and louder. I thought, how can we be moving? As I remembered where the trailer was parked with no way to get out, and there were no vehicles in the area we could see. The humming sound went on for a long time, then suddenly it stopped, and it felt like we'd stopped moving also. I'd nearly fallen asleep, but this jolted me wide awake. Fear and panic shot through me as I didn't know what was going to happen next. Minutes of uneasy silence went by, then I heard what I thought was a sound of struggling, then something getting slammed down on a hard surface, making a loud thud. Horrific thoughts entered my mind as I started thinking about Steve. Is he tied up in the dark like me? Or was that sound him? I thought. I continued struggling, trying to move my hands and feet to break them free. I thought I was making a little progress, but it was hard to tell because the space I was in was so small and my mind was going crazy with panic. The next thing I recall was being grabbed by my hair, yanked out of the space I was in, and dragged along the floor. Then whoever was dragging me abruptly stopped. I laid there on my stomach with my hands tied behind my back, too scared to move. It took my eyes some time to adjust, but when I looked up, I let out a blood-curdling scream as I couldn't believe what was in front of me on the wall of the trailer. There, hanging on an upside-down cross, was Steve's headless body. His head sitting just below his body. The expression on his face was unbearable to look at. He looked as if he'd endured an immense amount of pain and suffering. I closed my eyes and cried, hoping it was all just a dream. A few minutes later, I opened my eyes expecting to see Steve's head and body again, but there before me stood a man. He was glaring down at me with a stare I'll never forget. I remember vividly the whites of his eyes. He was wearing black pants, was barefoot, and the rest of his body was covered in black paint. His hair was shiny and slicked back. He'd drawn something in the paint on his chest that went down to his stomach. It was an upside-down cross, and below the name, Malthus, was written on his stomach, like he'd written it with his fingers. He didn't say anything as he easily lifted me off the floor, then slammed me down on a table that was in front of Steve's body. I fought back from screaming as I was now inches away from Steve's decapitated head. The man then walked behind me, and I could hear him looking for something. After minutes of commotion, he came back and stood over me. In one of his hands, I could see him holding what I think is called a sickle. He then started saying something I couldn't understand as he raised up both arms in the air. I remember thinking, this is how I'm going to die, as I closed my eyes and prepared myself to follow the same horrible death as Steve. As I laid there waiting to die, I heard something. It was someone or something speaking. The voice was deep and hoarse, and it was in a language I could not understand. I opened my eyes to see what it was when I saw the scariest thing I'd ever seen. Behind the painted man stood what looked like a half-man, half-beast. It was covered in black hair and was standing on two legs. It was staring right at me with its red eyes. I still can't describe what its face looked like. I'm not sure I ever will. I looked up at the painted man who was nodding his head as the thing spoke. Without warning, the thing turned into a big black bird, then vanished. The man slowly lowered his arms, turned, and walked back towards the direction he'd come from when he grabbed the sickle. I laid there for a while when suddenly the painted man came back, grabbed me by the shoulder, pulling me off the table. I hit the floor hard as pain surged through me. I again closed my eyes as I mentally prepared myself to die. Instead of killing me, the man grabbed my hands and started cutting through whatever was binding me. He then cut loose my feet. I laid there sprawled out thinking what I should do next when he suddenly grabbed me by the hair and dragged me towards the door. With his other hand, he flung the door open and continued dragging me until I was outside. When I hit the ground, I quickly turned around so I was facing him. He stood there, looking down at me and said, "You are not what the master is looking for." "Who are you? Why are you doing this?" I yelled out to him. He looked directly at me, his eyes cutting right through me. "I am the hand of the dark god. I am the dark Messiah. I am the Vengeful One," he responded. He then turned around, walked back into the trailer, shutting the door behind him. I wasted no time in getting up and as far away from him as quickly as I could, which wasn't very fast, being my feet were still numb. As I stumbled away from the trailer, I kept looking back. The last time I looked over my shoulder, to my disbelief, it was not there. It had completely vanished. It was also then I noticed I didn't recognize my surroundings. I was in the middle of nowhere, in a desert. At least that was my first thought, being I'd never been to a desert before, only seen pictures in books and on TV. I walked through the desert for a long time, not knowing where I was going until I came to a highway. I was so exhausted, I went and lay down in the middle of the road until a car came by and picked me up. I miss my friend. I can't believe he's gone. Jace Kelley was found over 1,000 miles away from where he'd been the previous day. He was picked up along Highway 95 by Bullhead City, Arizona. He was taken to the nearest police station where they called his parents. The couple that picked up Jace found him laying down in the middle of the highway. He was shaking and appeared to be in shock. What surprised them the most, though, was when he finally spoke, the first thing he said was, "Which state am I in?" Steve's and Jace's parents flew out to Arizona the following day. He told them the same story he told the authorities. As unbelievable as it sounded, there was no other choice but to believe him. There was no other possible way Jace could have made it that far in that period of time. There were no records of Steve or Jace ever flying by plane, which could have been the only other possibility. Steve was declared missing and a search was launched. Jace was able to trace his steps, showing authorities the spot he said he was dragged out of the trailer and released by the painted man. Authorities were able to see Jace's footsteps on the ground leading away from what appeared to be the imprints of 4 trailer tires in the middle of nowhere. There were no tire tracks leading to or from that spot, meaning it's as if the tire imprints appeared out of thin air. Steve was never found or heard from again. He was eventually declared dead. Over time, Jace became a recluse and refused to give interviews or talk to anyone about what happened. Rumor is he went searching for the green and white camping trailer, and still is to this day. For more scary horror stories, please subscribe.